course, we are all, as a nation, remembering former President George H.W. Bush, a man who really lived his entire life in service from the time that he was shot down in World War II, and then making his way to Washington as a congressman, the head of the CIA, eventually vice president, eventually president. Tributes and memories pouring in Washington and all around the country, flags flying at half-staff in his honor. Today, the former president will be flown from Houston to Washington, D.C., where he will lie in state inside the U.S. Capitol. After 2 days of public viewing, there'll be a funeral service that will take place on Wednesday at the National Cathedral. Then on Thursday, the late president will be laid to rest at his presidential library in Texas. And I think we all have these memories of him as a public person, but we've been hearing so much about him as a private person.
Yeah, we've been learning a lot. I learned a lot over the weekend about him. Yeah.
It really is very special. And this morning we have reports from Washington. We've got Savannah standing by, but we're also going to start in the former president's adopted state of Texas. Craig Melvin is there in Houston for us. Craig, what's the mood like there in Houston?
Well, you know, Al, it's Houston, Texas, but you might as well call it Bush, Texas, because, I mean, this was a city that didn't just adopt the president, but a city that he's called home for decades now. George H.W. Bush, born and raised in New England, no question, though, he was a son of the Lone Star State. After serving in the military, graduating college, he came here, and there was little doubt he would return again after leaving the White House. This morning, Houston and the world remembering President Bush.
This morning, a man whose entire life was defined by service, from the theater of war to the halls of Congress, all the way to the White House, is now being honored by the country he loved so deeply.
He lived a long life and he accomplished a lot of great things. It's kind of an end of an era.
Tributes pouring in for former President George Herbert Walker Bush. Overnight, a star-studded standing ovation at the Kennedy Center Honor Ceremony.
I think it's appropriate to recognize the passing of a wonderful man who dedicated his life to service and who graciously attended this event many times during his administration.
In his summer home in Kennebunkport, Maine, the 41st president's absence profoundly felt.
The former president and Mrs. Bush always had just a really remarkable presence in the community.
Mourners leaving socks among the flags and flowers. A nod to Bush's longtime love of the crazy and colorful footwear.
Our country lost an American hero.
In his adopted hometown of Houston. A moment of silence Sunday before the Texans game. And memorials at his statue overlooking the city's skyline and near his home.
It's very sad. He was a great man, and we loved him.
The former president's service dog, Sully, still by his side, sleeping next to his flag-draped casket. Bush's spokesman posting the photo with the caption, "Mission complete." Air Force One touched down in Houston Sunday. President Trump ordering the presidential plane to carry Mr. Bush on his final flight back to Washington, where he will lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda later today. It will be the start of 4 days of solemn and celebratory events to honor a humble hero who slipped away surrounded by friends and family.
I said, tell Gandhi we say hi.
Bush, now reunited with loved ones lost. Barbara, his wife of 73 years, and daughter Robin, who died of leukemia at age 3.
We all know he's in a better place. We know he's with our Aunt Robin. We know he's with Gandhi. He's good.
One of the former president's closest friends and political allies, former Secretary of State James Baker, was also by his side during his final moments as he said his last words, said to his son, George W. Bush.
He said, I love you, because 43 had called in to tell his father goodbye and tell him how much he loved him.
Former colleagues reflecting on the last president of the greatest generation.
I'm always asked which job I liked best out of the ones I had, and I always cite that period as Secretary of Defense for George Bush.
Everything he thought of, everything he did in public life was always directed to helping the American people. He was a patriot. He demonstrated that in war. He demonstrated that in peace.
The man who spoke so eloquently of 1,000 points of light, now being remembered as a shining example for all Americans. A president, a patriot, and a humble servant of our nation.
Air Force One will be called Special Air Mission 41 today and Wednesday as it transports the former president to and from Washington. Vice President Pence is going to be delivering a few remarks when former President Bush's casket arrives at the Capitol this afternoon, Al.
You know, Craig, it seems interesting to me that even though he was from New England, that the family was so associated with Texas, and Texas embraced them, obviously.
Oh, yeah. And, you know, his relationship with Texas, it started back during World War II. He trained south of here. He was in Corpus Christi, got his wings there, youngest pilot to get his wings. And then after that, you know, back in the 50s, he followed the oil boom. He set up shop here in Texas. He was a millionaire by the time he was in his early 40s. There was a reporter who asked him last year, Mr. President, you know, you were born in Massachusetts. Do you consider Texas your home now? And the president said, I don't want to be unkind here. I want to be gentle. But that's a dumb question. He was Texas through and through. The airport bears his name, his library, of course, just south of here in College Station. He loved Texas, and Texas loved him back.
Wow.
stuff.
Craig Melvin, thank you so much. I know you're going to be down there through the duration of this. Thanks so much for giving us that report. We really appreciate it.
So good.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned at the top of the show all of the different things he did in his public life, professionally. And then, obviously, you know, we were talking about this on Saturday, the balance of his family life and the way he was able to balance all of it. And now that, you know, obviously we're all friends with Jenna here, you realize just the magnitude of how he was able to balance it all. And then throughout all of it, just the humility.
Exactly.
You know, it's really, you know, people say life well lived, but truly a life
I'm
well
also
lived.
struck by how involved, you know, just talking about Texas for a moment, he and Barbara were with the state, but also, you know, he's going to be buried at Texas A&M. And the family didn't have any really strong connection to that university, but he and Barbara did, and they developed a love for that place. And it just goes to show the kind of energy and goodwill that he and his wife had to Texas.
Good point.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So much of his life spent in Washington, D.C. That's where we had once. Now, again, Savannah is there for us. And Savannah, it really is such a striking, when somebody said he's probably going to be the most successful one-term president. And it seems to me that was very striking because he looms so much larger. I thought it was actually more than one term.
Well, because he presided over incredibly consequential times, whether you're talking about foreign policy or ultimately the economy. And a lot of people give him credit for the fact that the Cold War came to an end without a single shot being fired. And many people, particularly in these last few days, have credited him with that. Many people are offering their remembrances of former President Bush, but none have the perspective like the ones you're about to hear from. For months over these last few years, many former presidents, including his own son, George W., sat down with 60 Minutes about the now late president and the impact that he had on the U.S. and the world.
First of all, being the child of a president is unpleasant. I mean, you watch somebody you love get lampooned or made fun of or harshly criticized, it hurts. And so by the time I became president, it didn't hurt nearly as much, it turns out. I think he's going to go down as the greatest one-term president ever.
What people don't appreciate fully, even within his own party, is the degree to which he had to land the plane when the Berlin Wall comes down. You have chaos, potentially, in the former Soviet Union and Russia, and uncertainty in Europe. All those things could have gone haywire at any point. And the restraint, the caution, the lack of spiking the football that they showed was, I think, an enormous achievement.
It's been one of the great joys of my life, my friendship with him. Don't let the critics discourage you or push you off course. You will be our president when you read this note. I wish you well. I wish your family well. Your success now is our country's success. I'm rooting hard for you. Good luck. This letter is a statement of who he is. It's why he's a world-class human being in my book.
He was a good reminder that as fiercely as we may fight on policy and on issues, that ultimately we're Americans first.
The mission was not George H.W. Bush. The mission was, how do we serve the United States? People, if they analyze not only his accomplishments, but his character, they'll say, job well done, George H.W. Bush.
And this week in Washington, we will all be reflecting on the job done by former President Bush there. Of course, he will be laid to lie in state here behind me, the Capitol Rotunda, later today, and then all of tomorrow, and then on Wednesday, that service, the National Public Service at the National Cathedral, guys.
You know, Savannah, we don't often see Republicans and Democrats coming together unified in purpose over anything. They're kind of going to do that this week as they honor President Bush. What's that going to be like?
Well, I think in some ways, these kinds of moments really show the best of our country, where we are united and honoring someone who passed and someone who served. And in so many ways, President Bush is from another era. You know, he was our last World War II president. He obviously was brought up and taught to whom much is given, much is expected. He was born a son of privilege, a senator's son, who ultimately, you know, became elected to Congress and then served pretty much every big job you could have had in Washington. And so I think there's a lot of respect for his accomplishments, respect for the way he presided over this country for 4 consequential years. And most of all, there's a real affection and longing for his humility and his decency and his modesty. And so many people are talking about those qualities.
You know, it seemed like that letter that he left Bill Clinton was the beginning of a tradition that you know, he was known for his letters, and the idea that he would leave that really speaks volumes.
Well, especially when you consider the time, because as much as we all are absolutely rightly waxing eloquent about what a wonderful, kind, and generous man he also was a competitor in everything from sports and certainly to politics. And that election in 1992 was so hard fought, and it was so disappointing to him to not be reelected. And for him to write that letter in the very moment of his grief that was so magnanimous and so generous, and saying, you're our president now, and I am rooting hard for you. I think that's one of the reasons why people have so much respect for him, and why he will be laid to rest and remembered so lovingly this week.
It's true. It's an example of just such grace. Yeah. Thank you, Savannah.
Thanks. All right. Savannah will be in Washington all through the memorial services and viewings to keep us up to date.